Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture in this benighted age, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes or by plugging our RSS feed into your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on Spotify, YouTube, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And visit patreon.com/VMSPod or paypal.me/VMSPod to make a one-time or recurring donation and help me continue to produce smart conversation about books, art, comics, and culture every week at the Virtual Memories Show. Well, we're doing 2 episodes this week because it's opening day for Major League Baseball, whatever that's going to mean. I'm of two minds about whether sports right now is advisable, partly because of their own health, partly the bread and circus aspect. There's a lot going on in this country, but maybe it'd be good to be able to watch baseball again. U.S. baseball, North American baseball, I would say, but the Toronto Blue Jays have been banned from playing in Toronto because of the health risk of traveling back and forth into the plague-ridden United States. So they are a nomad team trying to find a ballpark that will host them right now. Anyway, the thing I'll say about baseball, I've been a fan of baseball almost my entire life, and not, devoted sabermetric fantasy baseball sort of guy, but somebody who just has a game on a summer afternoon or evening. I will say the best summation of what baseball can sort of mean to an American, or to anybody, I guess, is season 3 of the TV show Brockmire by Hank Azaria. He is a baseball commentator who has horrible addiction issues and makes a comeback. And basically season 3, he sort of has a shot getting back to the major leagues and calling major league games, and really gets at what the game means to him on a deep level. It's a really beautiful TV show in a weird way. Anyway, I recommend Brockmire, Brockmire, which is not Longmire. Good TV show. Baseball's coming back. I'm excited for it in a weird way, even though I know within 15 minutes I'm going to end up saying, I forgot how boring this can get, and click over to Netflix or something like that. But whatever happens this season, I hope they make it through all 60 games in the playoffs. I'm glad they're trying to come back safely, not bringing fans into the stands. I don't know how feasible any of this is going to be, but nobody does at this point. Which brings us to today's guest, Ellen Lindner. Ellen, let's see. I met her a few times over the years at comics festivals like MoCA and SPX. And it's because she often tables with 3 of my regular pod guests and friends I've made through the show, Jennifer Hayden, Summer Pierre, and Glynis Fawkes. And while I would always shoot the breeze with the 3 of them at these shows, I never really talked to Ellen, who would kind of sidle off to the side or be talking to people whenever I'd come by their tables. But she came to the memorial service that I hosted for Tom Spurgeon in New York City in January, and we got to talking a little, and that's when I discovered she's kind of shy, which was a relief because at a certain point I thought maybe she hated me. So anyway, once we got to talking, I learned more about her comics and her other creative work and her devotion to baseball. So I figured back then it made sense for us to do an episode for opening day. Little did either of us know, opening day 2020 would come in late July. Now, I'll have links to Ellen's work in the show and episode notes for this one. She's done a bunch of comics and illustration work over the years. She's a teacher. But the project I want to recommend, and the one that she talks about the most in this show, is Cranklets Chronicle, a zine she puts out about women in baseball. The first 2 issues are fantastic. They've got these deeply researched pieces about her historical subjects told in this gorgeous comic style. And she'll talk about the subjects in the first 2 during the conversation. And why she's pursuing this project, what it means, and what baseball's historical lack of women and erasure of women from its history says. But anyway, the book also, or the zines also include these interviews with women who are baseball fans, and those are a joy. And they're a nice antidote to the knucklehead bro stereotype of baseball fans, at least in the New York area. I should note, a Yankees fan. Don't hate me. I came up with no baseball background whatsoever in the 70s. The Mets were god-awful. And the Yankees were a winning team, and they were local, and they had some character. And they had Billy Martin and all the other craziness. And baseball's been this ongoing narrative in my life that I don't talk about too much, but, hell, it's opening day, so we'll get at it. Ellen, on the other hand, is a Mets fan, which I just don't understand. We get into that, too. Now, as caveats go, not a lot. She came through nice and clear, no fan running in the background or sirens going off anytime or her phone ringing or anything like that. So yay. Now, here's Ellen's bio. Ellen Lindner is the author of the Ignatz-nominated graphic novel The Black Feather Falls, as well as Cranklets Chronicle, a history of women, baseball, and social change in America. Her comics have appeared in The Lily, Spiral Bound, World War III Illustrated, and a variety of other publications and anthologies. Ellen is also an educator and editor, and her activist art has been acquired by the Smithsonian Institution. A member of the Art HQ cartooning studio, she lives in Upper Manhattan. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Ellen Lindner. But as a Mets fan, wouldn't you be happier if they didn't play this year?
That is so cold. Well, it's funny you should ask that. I kind of feel I have, first of all, I have so many issues and concerns with the fact that Major League Baseball is happening at all this year.
I want to talk about that too, but yeah.
And it's funny you should ask that because last night I did sneak a peek at the exhibition game, which is the first televised game I'm aware of, that took place between the Mets and the Yankees. And yeah, when the Mets gave up, I think it was 7 runs in 1 inning, I did kind of have a moment of, this could have all been so different if this had never even happened. But by that time, it's too late. It's officially too late. The traditional Met black cat is out of the bag. And yeah, it's just, although I have to say in that game, there were a lot of players where I was like, who is this person?
That's part of the first exhibition game of the year thing. Like, you're not seeing everyone, but
yeah, although of course even the anonymous Yankees were doing way better than the anonymous Mets, so
sorry, dude.
Although I did catch a glimpse of the baseball equivalent of a Yeti. Yoenis Cespedes, the Mets infamously cursed outfielder, is back playing baseball. He's recovered from his boar attack. And all of the other issues that have befallen him in the last year and a half, I think it is, maybe 2 years. And so there is some hope. If the Boers couldn't get Yoenis Cespedes, there's hope for all of us.
I think the grand irony will be if, like, every other player goes down with COVID and he's the one guy left standing at the end.
I mean...
Yeah, no, but throughout, I've got this, I'm a basketball guy too, and I've just got this degree of like, which league is going to go down faster? You
Oh
know,
no,
it's
it's
just
really. At least the NBA, from what I understand, is taking place in a quote unquote bubble.
in theory,
Yeah.
they're doing it in a single location, but it's still, guys are having the Postmates things show up. They're still not quite getting the
Postmate.
non-permeability. Yeah, like having the food delivery guy show up, and it's like, dude, I don't think you get that you might be risking the entire league and billions of dollars of revenue by getting Taco Bell, but
Oh
whatever.
Lord. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
all too predictable. I mean, at the end of the day, we're just going to have to send them our traditional American thoughts and prayers, and just hope it all works out okay. NWSL has been fine. They're on the verge of completing their tournament, and that took place in a bubble. Who knows whether or not they got Uber Eats or caviar deliveries? Unknowable.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, you do mention the American hopes and thoughts and prayers. The Blue Jays just got the heave ho from Canada yesterday.
I
Apparently, they're not
know.
going to be
Well,
allowed
I
to
don't
play
know if
in
they got the
Toronto.
heave ho or if all the other MLB teams are basically banned from Toronto.
I think that's part of it, and they didn't want a Canadian team traveling back and forth into the shithole countries like America.
But that's the problem. The fact that there's a travel component to the
Yeah.
MLB restart is where it loses me completely.
Yeah, even when I look at the exhibition games, we have another Yankee Met game today. On the East Coast, you see ones that are generally geographically fine. New York, New York, even Philly, Baltimore, Chicago, Chicago. Then you get to like Arizona, Dodgers, and it's like, but those are very far from each other, and somebody's going to be traveling. And yeah, I'm torn between whether that's putting them more at risk or the NBA hyper concentration of things is putting them more at risk as to which one's going to be a problem. The outside shot is that the NFL will collapse even before it begins because apparently they've done nothing in terms of like figuring out protocols,
That's
and they have
definitely
more
an
players
approach.
than everyone else. Yeah, so it's really odds on as to which of the majors will go down first. But where'd baseball start for you? And we'll get to comics, trust me. But where did baseball?
I'm sure
begin?
the people listening are wondering when will comics? Please let there be some comics. No more sports. Yeah, my experience with the comics world is that there are a couple of people who I can talk sports with, and everyone else just kind of covers their ears, which I respect. I completely respect that, because to go to your question about how I came to baseball, it does feel like something I was kind of brainwashed into. I'm not sure how much conscious choice there was. It just happened that when I was growing up on Long Island, the New York Mets won the 1986 World Series. And so now immediately everyone knows how old I am. Very old. I was in third grade. I loved Gary Carter, and we watched all the games. It was so exciting.
I was at a Billy Joel concert at Madison Square Garden during Game 1 against
That
the
is
Red
a very
Sox.
Long Island way of spending your time, I have to say.
Yes, I was Northern New Jersey, and I just, as you mentioned, Long Island and all this stuff. I'm like, yeah, I was literally, Billy Joel was giving us updates until the Mets were losing, and then he stopped giving updates to the audience. So yeah,
It's best to just draw a veil over the whole thing. Yeah. And my mom is a huge Mets fan. When she grew up as a rarity, a Yankees fan in Brooklyn. And she was kind of becoming an adult when the Mets won the 1969 World Series. And this is, of course, after the sort of annus horribilis when the New York Giants and the Brooklyn Dodgers left New York City in the same year, the same month, if I'm not mistaken, for California. And basically all you had for a while was the Yankees. And so I feel like that exculpates her from being a Yankees fan. Otherwise, I find that to be a fairly serious offense. And so when the Mets won the World Series, it was just like this, it was an almost literal miracle. There was no way they were supposed to win. The Baltimore Orioles they were playing had a dynasty going that is still discussed. Just a fantastic team. And yeah, it's a mess. It's just like a typical Mets thing. Like, yeah, we can only succeed when the odds are completely against us. And And so basically, when I was a kid, we would go to my grandparents' house every Sunday and we would watch the Mets. My grandfather was also a huge Mets fan. And this is in Eastern Queens, where, you know, as with Long Island, it's kind of like the thing to be excited about. Especially when I was a kid, the city was a little bit depressing. You know, it was the time of the AIDS epidemic. Crime was really high. And so having something like the Mets to focus on, and we'll draw a veil as well over the many Yankees World Series victories at the same time. But
the 80s were not great for the Yankees. The 70s were fantastic.
The 70s were amazing.
As a little kid, fell into him.
If anyone listening to this wants a non-comics thing to think about, Ladies and Gentlemen, The Bronx is Burning, the fantastic book about the Yankees, Billy Martin and Reggie Jackson, is a must read if you're interested in New York City history. And that's the last thing I'm going to say about the Yankees.
You do have an Aaron Judge theory, though, so that's...
Oh no, it's very not safe for work.
Never mind.
He just has this mystery injury. Like, what kind of... I don't know. I actually really appreciate him as a player, and so I want him to be healthy. But the fact that like a young guy in his 20s is just like perpetually injured is just very, very strange to me. He looks
being
like Superman.
6'7" and
sorry, what's that?
I was going to say, being 6'7" and having that sort of swing can lead to all sorts of oddball injuries. It reminds me of 2001. I was in Seattle during Ichiro's rookie year in the U.S. or in Major League, and they were taking on the Indians. I had really close-up seats on the first base line, and he got to first, and the Indians' first baseman was Jim Tomei, who was also like 6'5", 6'6", and it looked like a father and son standing there, because Ichiro is this, you know, slim 5'7", 5'8" guy, and having this Titanic monstro standing next to him just really looked odd. You know, having a disparity in terms of, you know, body types, but
oh, totally. I mean, the modern equivalent of that, I guess, would be pictures of Aaron Judge next to Jose Altuve.
Oh yeah, I remember that. That was great.
Which are they look photoshopped, because Altuve, I think, is 5'6". And yeah, whenever they end up on bases together, it's just like, what is even happening?
Yeah, the perspective is totally off. You think something's been foreshortened. Yeah, it's completely wrong. But
sorry.
Yeah. No, I was going to ask if the Korean version of baseball helped, but, you know, keeping things in perspective. But tell me what you were going to say.
That's one of the things I like about baseball and soccer, actually. It accommodates a wide variety of body types. And it's one of the reasons why it's so bizarre that Major League Baseball and baseball in general is a culture that keeps women at such an arm's length. And actually, this is kind of where it ties into comics, because I had a moment where a friend told me, you know, baseball is super sexist. I don't know why you watch it. And I had this almost crystal clear moment of realization that I had never, I had never seen a woman play baseball. And I consider myself fairly feminist in a lot of ways. And I should have cottoned onto this sooner. But it took somebody who had that outside perspective to kind of wake me up to it. My friend is incredibly intelligent. I take her opinion very seriously. And so basically, I decided that until I solved this mystery of why baseball was so sexist, and I couldn't argue with her, it was just clear, I couldn't really sit with my fandom as comfortably as I had. And so that's why I started doing comics about the history of women in baseball. My comic about it is called The Cranklets Chronicle. And I'm currently working on the third issue, which is basically about the history of women specifically playing baseball. The first two issues were about women who were involved in the managerial or ownership side. Joan Whitney Payson, who is the person who put up all of the cash for the founding of the New York Mets, and who was instrumental in the New York Mets even existing. And Effa Manley, who was a huge force in the world of black baseball during the segregated era, and who owned a team with her husband called the Newark Eagles, who won the, I have to use this term just because it's historical, the quote-unquote Negro Leagues World Series, basically a year before Jackie Robinson entered Major League Baseball. And so I'm really curious about this issue I don't know if anyone else is curious about it, but it's something I was really interested in. And so that's kind of where it comes back to comics.
Well, there's been the novelty thing of, I'm blanking on her name, but some great female softball player and whether she could strike out a Major League Baseball player. I don't know if it was with a softball or, overhand baseball that she'd be throwing, but that was it's still at the novelty level at most, I guess, the Bobby Riggs sort of thing.
It is, but it doesn't have to be. I have mixed feelings about whether or not women either okay, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. Women have always played baseball. It just hasn't been discussed. And there was kind of this movement in the late 19th century that ties in with American imperialism in a very intimate way. Where people looked at baseball, especially white men, looked at baseball and said, this is something we want for ourselves. And this is the period when Black men were banned from baseball, where it's the advent of the so-called gentleman's agreement. But at the same time, there were efforts to keep it just for men, as opposed to the kind of unisex sport it had been up until that point. For example, there were teams at women's colleges in the United States in the 1860s and 1870s. There were Black professional women's teams in the Philadelphia area in the 1880s. There were women who were playing baseball at a pretty proficient level and with a lot of enthusiasm. But it just didn't sit well with some people that baseball, quote unquote, America's pastime, shouldn't just be the preserve of white men. And unfortunately, it's an attitude that stuck. And so, for example, when you're asking about, whether or not a woman could strike out a major league ball player, whether or not a softball player could strike out a major league ball player, that has already happened. There was an incident in the 1930s where in an exhibition game, a young woman named Jackie Mitchell, a young woman in Tennessee, struck out Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig in the course of an exhibition game. And so it's not really a question of can this happen? It's a question of why aren't we talking about the fact that it has already happened?
And tell me where the Cranklet Chronicles began for you. That decision to start making comics and also doing the narratives around the issue. I know the zine itself started in 2018. How long had the idea been gestating for you?
That's the beauty of mini comics. It had been gestating for about 15 minutes. So basically,
I was going to go in the other direction because you got a copy of my zine, and that took about 22 years from the time I first thought of it until the time I actually produced one.
I say 15 minutes because the execution, basically in comics, there are not many barriers to entry. It's not like I had to find someone to publish it for me. This is something I did on my own. But yeah, just absorbing the knowledge necessary to do it probably took a lifetime. Although the thing I was most shocked at was just that growing up as a Mets fan, I hadn't known that a woman had been so instrumental in founding the team. It's something that really isn't talked about very much within the Mets world. And Joan Whitney Payson proved to be such a fascinating figure. I think it's really hard for people to understand now because New York City is so vibrant and is kind of such a desirable place to be. But in the 1950s, people thought the West Coast was the future. And in many ways it was. But New York City was basically being taken over by people who thought that the city was failing. And the only way to make it fail slower was to make it more like a suburb, basically to put highways everywhere. There were a lot of people who looked at the kind of older ballparks in New York City, like Ebbets Field, where the Dodgers played, or the Polo Grounds, which is in the neighborhood where I currently live, Upper Manhattan, Washington Heights. And they looked at them and they're like, well, I want something that's nice and new and modern. The 50s was all about wanting new, modern things. And so basically the owners of the two New York teams decided, well, the place that will welcome us and give us money to build these new modern stadia where people can drive up and there will be plenty of parking, all that is on the West Coast. And so we're just going to leave. And the only person who opposed this within that world was Joan Whitney Payson, who is an heiress to the Whitney fortune. She was a billionaire in today's money. And she had shares in the New York Giants, who are now the San Francisco Giants. And she was literally the only person who voted to keep them in New York City, which to me is sad. The Giants had a long and fabulous history in New York City. The Dodgers have still played longer in Brooklyn than they have in LA. And it's sad. You know, I'm sentimental. I guess I'm a sentimental person. And, you know, seeing the city that I love, the city in whose orbit I've always kind of existed, kind of being seen as so undesirable and so outdated and just ready to be kicked to the curb. It's hard to imagine that in the city that I currently live in, which is, you know, relatively safe, relatively
completely
economically. Sorry?
Completely unaffordable, but yeah.
Well, I should say I consider myself very happy. I'm very, very lucky to live here. I understand that it is, in some ways, a privilege, but it's also the city. I mean, my parents grew up here. My grandparents lived here. It's just the city I've always wanted to be in. And so I think I've probably made some compromises in other areas to make it happen. But anyway, I just couldn't believe that I'd never heard the story before. And so basically I wanted to tell it in the medium that I have access to, which is comics.
And where did comics start for you? As a reader first and then as a creator?
That's a really good question. It probably starts in the same place where I got my baseball fandom, which is my grandparents' apartment. My grandparents had a subscription to the Daily News. My parents had a subscription to the New York Times, which famously did not have any comics in it, including editorial comics. So I would go there and I'd have like my little can of Coke in my little like styrofoam cup, and I'd read the Daily News Sunday funnies, and I'd watch the Mets.
With Dondi on the front page?
I'm sorry?
With Dondi on the front page, the Daily News comics section. I always remember Dondi was the front. It was one of the least palatable comics around.
Oh, that's so fun. I don't remember that at all. I remember Dick Tracy, Pogo, Calvin and Hobbes. This is kind of like
you young whippersnapper.
Yeah, I guess I'm talking about the mid 80s.
Yeah, it would have been late 70s into the early 80s.
Okay.
Yeah.
They might have changed some things around. I remember Doonesbury. There were a bunch of comics that like I think were actually quite influential on me that I experienced in that context. And then of course, as I got older, I just happened to kind of hit the beginning of the Marvel boom. And like all anyone at my school could talk about was like X-Men and Wolverine. And so I got sucked into comics in that way as well, kind of reading mainstream superhero comics. I never read DC comics. I found DC comics really confusing for some reason, but I loved X-Men, and I loved all the kind of fun, romancy nonsense that
It's a soap opera. In a good way, because I was an X-Men kid again a few years earlier, and the soap opera quality of it and the romance, yeah, that was a big part of the appeal. Besides the cosmic adventure and all that stuff.
Oh, I mean, people can judge me all they want, but I barely remember the adventure plots. I just remember, the sad demise of Wolverine's girlfriend. In Wolverine 57, all the like Gambit Rogue nonsense. I just enjoyed it so much. I loved the art. I still love Mark Silvestri's Wolverine just deeply.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. And then of course I got even older as you do. And that was around the time that stuff like, Chester Brown's first graphic novels were coming out. Tank Girl, was really influential on me. I loved Jamie Hewlett's artwork so much. And it was kind of a weird time to be in comics. Like I didn't really know any other, kind of young girls or people who presented as female, who enjoyed comics. All I knew were the guys at the local, comic book shop.
Sure.
But then I got to college and I was fortunate enough to go to Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts.
Oh, I went to
And
Hampshire. So.
did you really? Oh, wow.
Yeah,
That's
which people do
hilarious.
find difficult to believe. Well,
How
I
have
like to
we
say
never talked about this?
I'm the only Hampshire graduate who can say I'm a lobbyist for the pharmaceutical industry, possibly in the entire history of the college of 50 years. I may be the only one to have that job description.
You're not the only one in comics, though.
No, but within the whole Hampshire world, I think I might be the only guy who's been lobbying for the pharma industry on Capitol Hill. But yeah, I have the Northampton of. Well, I was 89 to 93, just around that time.
Okay, so I don't
So
know if you
when
were.
Eastman and Laird were blowing up, and
Yeah, so I was there after that, and basically by that time, Kevin Eastman had made enough money off of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and its various media incarnations that he was able to buy and exhibit a huge collection of original comics at this place called the Words and Pictures Museum of Sequential Art. And I volunteered there. And so I got to see, Jaime Hernandez's originals up front and personal, up close and personal. I got to see all this classic comics art that I'd never even heard of before. I got to see Dave McKean's sculptures that were on the cover of Sandman.
Oh, wow.
It was just phenomenal. And it really feels like a sort of like, I have to be honest, I did go to Smith partly because of this museum. They also gave me a very generous financial aid package, which I'm still eternally grateful for. And so I volunteered at Words and Pictures. And then Smith has a really phenomenal junior year abroad program where you basically just you pay the same tuition, but you get to spend the year in France or Switzerland or Germany or a variety of other countries. And again, this is something I'm still hugely grateful for. It was it was a big year for me. I learned so much. And also I just got to experience European comics culture. Walking into a library in a perfectly ordinary town in France, and just finding the most incredible comics I'd ever seen. And so as part of that year, I applied for a grant from Smith to extend my year abroad. And I spent 3 months doing a comics version of The City of Ladies by Christine de Pizan, who's a kind of early Renaissance writer who looked at the works of people like Boccaccio and basically said, this is anti-feminist trash. I'm going to tell the stories that these people told, but in my own way, and kind of redeeming the female characters who are so demonized in so much of the literature of that time. And so that was super, that was such a wonderful experience. I got to go to the Bibliothèque Nationale and do lots of research into medieval manuscripts, and it was really great. And then I arrived in New York City in the year 2000, and somehow in events that are lost to the mist of time, I ended up meeting a lot of really fabulous cartoonists. I met Sarah Varon, I met Dean Haspiel, I met Bishak Som, I met Howard Airy, I met Joan Riley, and I met Matt Madden and Jessica Abel and Megan Kelso. And it was just a really fabulous time to be in New York City and making comics. Everybody was so fabulously welcoming and so lovely. And I got to meet so many people I idolized. I idolized Jessica Abel and Megan Kelso from seeing their comics previously. And I was doing a zine, and so I'd interview them. And it was just it was such a great learning experience. And then, of course, September 11th happened, which was crazy. Now I feel like people don't realize what a big event it was. I feel like people kind of take it for granted, and they, people talk about it so much, but it was really traumatizing at the time. It was so scary. And I was part of a small group who organized a benefit in the city because SPX was canceled. And so there are all these people who are in New York City. They'd flown into New York City from France or from other countries to attend SPX, and then they couldn't come because the city was shut down. They were stuck there. And so we had this event called SPX Isles that was a benefit for first responders, if I remember correctly. And so I met a lot of other people there. And it was just, I don't know, comics at the time, nobody was making any money off of it. It was kind of before the graphic novel boom really hit American publishing. And I feel like it was just a very chill vibe. At the time I was working in the fine art world, which was a completely different vibe. Everything was about money. And it was very...
What were you doing?
I'm sorry?
What were you doing? What was your
I was working for the website of the Museum of Modern Art.
Okay.
And so that was a totally different vibe. It was very capitalistic. MoMA felt very corporate. And so comics was an escape for me. And I met so many people who are still heroes of mine to this day. And then I left New York briefly to do, well, I thought it was briefly. I thought it was briefly, to do a fellowship at a university in Philadelphia. Actually just outside of Philadelphia. They had this, Haverford College had this kind of strange job available, which was that you could work part-time in the art department, but they'd give you a studio budget and they'd give you a studio. And so I applied for it, never thinking I would get it, and I got it. And while I was in Philadelphia, I went to the Angoulême Festival, I think for the second time. And while I was there, I met the person who's now my husband, who is English. And I decided to go live with him in the UK. And so I spent 8 years in the United Kingdom, living in London, and I did a master's in illustration. And then at some point I was like, this is great. However, I really want to go back to New York City. And so we arrived back in New York in 2012. And yeah, and so I've been here ever since. And that's kind of the history of my my life in comics. In the meantime, I did some graphic novels.
Yeah,
and organized
creating comics, blah. Yeah,
yeah. I did a graphic novel called Undertow, which I'd started when I was still in New York, which is about Coney Island in the early 1960s, and about a girl growing up in an alcoholic household and her attempts to kind of like free herself from her neighborhood. And then I did a graphic novel called The Black Feather Falls, which is set in 1920s London and is a whodunit about kind of focusing on issues about World War I and its impact on the UK. And
have you always been a history buff, maven? You know, has history always been an interest for you?
Yeah. I'm not really sure where that comes from. My best theory is that my father, who is a Vietnam War veteran, loves military history, and he would always talk to me about military history. And I always did well in history in school, and I studied art history when I was at Smith. And yeah, so I've always been very enthusiastic about it. Even now, I mean, a lot of my reading is nonfiction, as opposed to fiction. I just think it's really interesting. It helps you to understand all the craziness that's going on in the contemporary moment, if you have some kind of background or context for it.
I don't think anything prepares us for what we're currently going through, but that's okay. That's just my own.
Well, I mean, it's a start.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a start. And yeah, so Cranklets Chronicle, I guess, kind of just like, it's actually it's not the first time I've done nonfiction comics. I've done a lot of nonfiction comics. And actually I supported myself through much of the time when I was in the UK, doing nonfiction comics for textbooks about for a huge variety of subjects. And I did the only time I've been a notable comic in Best American Comics was for a comic I did for a zine that Robin Chapman did about called Hey Four Eyes, about eyeglasses. And so I did one about scams related to improving your vision, of which there is a crazy history. And so, yeah, I think it's just something I've always gravitated towards. But I feel like with Cranklets Chronicle, it's kind of a good intersection between my interest in history, my interest in feminism and women's history, and also just trying to figure out why baseball is such a culture that's so close to women. And so I feel like it's a good fit for me. I'm not sure. I mean, some people are really interested in it. Other people are not really that interested in it. And that's totally fine. For me, it's kind of a labor of love. It's something I'm curious about. And so I find it really satisfying. I think with comics, they take so much effort. It has to be something you're passionate about. If it's something you're not 100% passionate about, that is going to, that the 10,000 hours it takes to make a graphic novel are going to be a huge slog. And so I feel really grateful to have found a subject that I'm so interested in.
Yeah, it seems the way you were describing it, having read the first 2 issues, everything we have talked about seems to be synthesized within those 2 books so far. Like it's got every angle you've discussed, seems to be crystallized in that, in those 2 comics. So, again, I can't wait to see the next one. Not that there's any pressure, I figure
the next
we're all,
one, it was supposed to come out for MoCA, and then the city just went into total meltdown. It's in progress and it's written. I am working on another project about women in baseball, which is kind of on the DL at the moment. And so it's still something I'm working on a daily basis.
So I like the fact that we can take that both as down low and disabled list, given our overlapping sets of interest.
No, this is 100% down low. It is not disabled. It is not injured. It is not. No one has been attacked by wild boars. It's totally fine.
It's only on a 15-day DL. So
it's just something I can't talk about yet, but sure. I'm really excited about. Basically, I got contacted by someone who is a huge hero of mine in the baseball world, and they were interested in working on a memoir, and so that's what I'm working on at the moment. And so Cranklets Chronicle will come back.
Don't say anything else. It's okay. Don't give away anything by accident. Don't give away anything by accident. I don't want you teasing us too much.
Well, I'm so, maybe it's just my age showing, but for me, when there are no comics conventions to go to, it makes it really hard to, I don't know, like to get excited about putting out new work. So I've chosen to focus more on like longer term projects, but I have just contributed to the anthology that Whitney Matheson and Dean Haspiel have put together called Pandemics, which is about it's just basically the pandemic. It's about COVID-19 and the effect it's had on people's lives. And that actually, by the time this will come out, it will have come out because that drops on July 21st.
I looked it up right after. I'm sorry, you'd mentioned it in an email. I looked up. It'll come out this week, so we'll be able to tell people to.
I would definitely recommend checking that out. It benefits the Hero Initiative, and so it's a really good cause, helping out creators in the comics world. Not the Comic Book
Legal Defense Fund? I'm just kidding. Sorry.
Oh my God,
we'll let that one go.
Please edit that out. You were trying to get
Hero
in trouble.
Initiative. No, that's getting myself in trouble. That's okay. But yeah, so it goes to the Hero Initiative, or it'll be a benefit for them. And
I have really enjoyed reading it. It's so fascinating to see what other New Yorkers have gone through during this period, whether it's the cartoonist themselves or someone who they've chosen to collaborate with. My comic is actually, I think, the comic that's caused me the most anxiety over the entirety of my time doing comics. Yep. It's a project I've been working on with my mother about recovery culture and how that has influenced like both of our reactions to the pandemic. My mother grew up in an alcoholic home, although she doesn't like using that term. She prefers to say people who abuse alcohol because alcoholic is so stigmatizing. But basically, she has been in recovery meetings for people who are family members of alcoholics for the whole of my kind of like conscious life. And through my whole childhood, she would kind of tell me things that she learned in these meetings. And I kind of always pushed it away because I think that's kind of like part of the dysfunction. You don't want to acknowledge that you have problems. When you see someone seeking help, it kind of forces you to look at your own life. And so I just kind of pushed it away. But since the beginning of the pandemic, I've been thinking about all the things she told me so much. And I'm actually really grateful to her for sharing all of this with me. Basically some of them may sound like cliches, like one day at a time, like saying the serenity prayer, only focusing on things that you can change, only focusing on things that you can do today. But when the city you live in is going into complete and utter chaos, because of a pandemic, which is completely outside of the scope of your experience, outside the scope of your country's experience, I feel like it's really anything that you can draw upon that helps you to get through it is valid. And so I did a comic. I interviewed my mom. And actually, this is something that we had started doing before Dean and Whitney reached out. So I already kind of had the material, and we were already in discussion about it. But then when Dean and Whitney approached me, it was just a good opportunity to get it out. It kind of broke me out of my pandemic brain torpor.
Sure.
And so that was really great timing. And yeah, so I did it in a style which is completely new to me. I actually, my day job is in informational illustration, and because I had to do it really quickly, I did it in the style I use for my day job. And so I hope people like it. I enjoy doing it. It's just scary to work on family stories, as anyone who's ever told a family story will tell you. And so I just
I haven't sent my mom a copy of that zine yet, and because there's a fictional story about my mother, or the lead character's mother, in that zine that I sent you, and I actually haven't sent it to my mom because I know she will somehow take this as, this is too much about me. And I realize at 50, I should probably be over that. But what I'm telling you is, you're Catholic, I'm Jewish. We never get over that guilt. We'll always be freaked out and have anxiety about anything revolving around family. So.
It is so true. But also it's just, I teach comics. In addition to making comics, I teach comics at a community space in my neighborhood called Word Up Community Bookshop. Libreria Comunitaria. Sorry, my Spanish accent is terrible. Libreria Comunitaria. And I teach nonfiction comics specifically because it's kind of where my heart is right now. And it's amazing how, it's not amazing. Maybe it's not amazing. It's not surprising, but it is extreme, the extent to which family members, people you write about, can actually experience a lot of negative emotions if you don't approach them in the right way. I usually tell my students just to change all of the names, because not just for legal reasons, but also because it just gives your subject a sense of safety. People can't find them, like weirdos can't, like a student, one of my comic students did a story about a family member that he thought was very respectful. But when his family members saw it, they actually were worried for the safety of the subject. They were worried that someone was going to read the comic and then find this person. Anytime you raise someone's profile in any way, it can be anxiety inducing. And so it is tricky. Luckily in comics, there are so many people who do it really well. So at least you can point to, a variety of people who've done it successfully and show people that this is a really valid way of telling family stories. But comics is also littered with stories of people who were cut off by their families, or who were just initially scorned by their families for telling their story. I remember seeing David Bay, who created the wonderful series Epileptic for L'Association. And his parents basically cut him off, even though Epileptic is just about the story, which he lived as well, about trying to find a cure for his epileptic brother. It doesn't portray his family in a poor light. However, just telling a family story, it opens so many old wounds in some cases. And so this is a story I never would have told without my mother. And I showed her a lot of drafts. We talked about the language. She didn't try and censor me in any way, but I'm glad that we had those discussions. Because because it just makes me feel like it's more authentic. And it's something that we both have buy-in on. And I think that's important.
And how did you settle on the original, well, the style you've been employing for comics prior to this one? Because looking at it, I'm like, there's a Seth thing going on. There's like an old Seth, Jason Lutz, but it's also you. And I'm curious as to, developing that style, knowing that in some of your work, there's also a more realist kind of sketchy style that you've employed for storytelling effect, I guess, or for storytelling purposes. Where'd the visual style and the storytelling style come from?
That's a really good question. I mean, in terms of influences, because I grew up reading so many superhero comics and sort of like early zine comics, I think I always have a sort of bias towards a more quote unquote realistic way of depicting people. I loved reading the funny pages when I was a kid, but it was kind of at a time when people like Bill Watterson were working. That was more of an influence on me than maybe like more cartoony, more abstract ways of depicting people might have been previously. And so Seth is definitely a big influence. Jessica Abel is a big influence. I'm going to go totally blank now on other people who have been influences. I'm also influenced by the world of illustration. I love Adrian Tomina. I love Jaime Hernandez, who are, I think of primarily as cartoonists, but who also have very successful illustration careers. Jeremy Nguyen is another person whose work I really love. And so, yeah, I feel like that kind of realistic vibe always sneaks in. With Cranklets Chronicle, I wanted a style that would work across both images that I was creating myself, but also images I was recreating from period photographs. And so I wanted something where there'd be like a joining up possible without it being really obvious that this is a drawing that I did and this is a photograph. And yeah, part of it is just also being in a transitional period with my own work. With Cranklets Chronicle, I was transitioning from working completely traditionally with the Black Feather Falls and just coloring digitally to, with Cranklets Chronicle, inking digitally, but also coloring digitally. Just inking digitally. But I still wanted this sort of organic feel. So that's why I've been using watercolor as a sort of tone. My style changes a lot from project to project. But I think that is the constant. I tend to prefer like a simple palette, and I tend to prefer realistic depictions of figures. I occasionally flirt with a more cartoony style. And in my day job, I use a more cartoony style as well. And actually with this new project and with the story I did for Pandemics, I'm getting more cartoony. You'll see stuff like the sort of like classic Dan Clowes elbow that's just like a loop. Silly things like that I've kind of grabbed. But yeah, it's always evolving. I don't feel like I have a fixed style. I feel like with comics, I've always kind of flown under the radar. And so it's given me a lot of freedom to experiment constantly. I think that I can't remember who said this, but I feel like there's an attitude about making comics, partly because they take so long, but also because they're a very personal art form where there is an evolution over the course of your entire creative career, and that's okay. I feel like, I hope the comics I'm doing when I'm 60, first of all, I hope I'm still doing comics because
sure.
As anyone who does comics knows, your back hurts, your shoulder hurts, your hand hurts, your wrist hurts. It's crazy. But I hope that the comics I'm doing when I'm 60 or 70 or 80 or 90 are different from the comics I'm doing now.
How much does your illustration work? Well, the way you were talking about it, the way the illustration feeds back into comics or vice versa. I know there are two different types of gigs, versus commission stuff versus, self-expression, comics. But does illustration feed into what you do? Does it teach you anything that you can feed back into comics, or vice versa?
I think, okay, so to backtrack, I got out of college not ever thinking I would have a career as a cartoonist. Like, it wasn't a goal for me. I loved comics. I just didn't think you could make any money off of them. And so I've had a succession of side gigs.
Sorry, go on. Yeah.
Yeah. I've had a succession of side gigs since day one. I've worked in print production. I've worked in retail. I've worked in childcare. I have done so many different gigs. And I've done a lot of illustration. And illustration for me is something that has always pushed me to up my game, always. I've always learned from it. I've always gotten a lot out of it. It's something that I never thought of as a career, even though I was a quote unquote illustrator my whole life. I did illustrations for my own stories. I made comics. I won an award for illustrating my high school paper, stuff like that. But I never thought of it as something I could do. My family is very practical. My dad is an engineer. My mom is a retired nurse. The people in my family who loved art came from a background where it was impossible to impossible to even consider making it a career. Both my grandmother and my great aunt loved art, painted their whole lives. My grandmother gave me a lot of encouragement, but they came from a working class background where being an artist was just out of the picture, especially for women, particularly for women. Sure. They were just expected to be wives and mothers. And so illustration for me was a surprise, but is something that has always given me a little extra to bring back to my own work. And when I talk to people, especially cartoonists who are just starting out I have a friend who's a much younger cartoonist who occasionally asks me questions about their career. And whenever they ask, should I take this illustration job? My bias is always towards taking it because it challenges you in terms of time management. It challenges you in terms of, dealing with other people. It challenges you in terms of, getting out of your ego a little bit. But also it gives you validation in cash. So why would you say no? Sure. During the pandemic, I was lucky enough to work on a series of public health ads for the city. And it was one of the best experiences I've ever had in my artistic career, just being able to be involved in something I really believed in, fighting COVID-19, hopefully defeating it, just through simple stuff, wash your hands. Celebrate holidays with families, but be very careful, be conscious of how you're navigating the world, because it's not just about you, it's about all of us. And so I am very grateful for whatever kind of career I've had in illustration. I currently work predominantly for a company called Dotdash, which is a company that used to be about.com, and they have a variety of websites that deal with a huge variety of topics, everything from really specific medical illustration to how to build a picnic table to what is Baba Ganoush. And so it's a constant challenge to up my game, draw new stuff. I feel so happy to have access to all this cool subject matter. I get to draw places to travel, places to eat, things to do. It's just been something that was totally unexpected, but has been really fun and which I really hope to do more of.
And speaking of battling the pandemic, you also became a mask maker as part of.
Oh my gosh!
You were the first person I knew from my, we'll say, social circle, even though I'm an antisocial monster. You're the first person from my circle who was actively making her own masks. Which
really?
I was like, oh, that's where we're going in this world. And then other people started flooding in, but you happened to be the first one. So that when Tom Tomorrow was asking online, does anyone know someone making masks? I was like, as a matter of fact, I do, and send them your way. But But,
He is such a sweet guy, by the way, and I love his work. I'm a huge fan of his work and have been, I mean, as long as I've read The Village Voice, R.I.P. I love his work so much, and I still love it on the nib. He's phenomenal. I feel like sometimes you just see the writing on the wall, and I could see where all this was going kind of early. I didn't have the option of leaving New York City. My family live on Long Island in what is another hotspot. And we just don't have anywhere else to go. And so it became a question of like, how do you prepare to spend who knows how much time, in the midst of this disease? And initially there was a lot of debate about whether or not masks were a good way of preventing the spread of the disease. And then at some point it became clear that not wearing masks was the best way of spreading it. And so I have sewn my whole life. I love sewing. It's a guilty pleasure of mine, along with Los Mitts. And basically I have an obscene amount of fabric. I just can't even tell you. It's absurd. It's a lot easier to buy fabric than to find time to do anything with it. And so, so I started making masks for friends and for people in my community. And then, you connected me with Tom to use his nom de plume. And it was really cool to connect with him because he's someone I really admire. And he's also a neighbor. We both live in Upper Manhattan. He lives on the Upper West Side. I live in Washington Heights. And it was really cool. It got a little stressful because people who are not in New York City just had no idea how much the infrastructure had broken down. So I would put things in the mail and then they would kind of disappear for a while. And I had to tell people, like, you don't know what's happening with the Postal Service here. It is falling apart. People are dying. Like, I don't have a lot of control over this. And people were understanding once I explained it to them. But like, New York was a very scary place to be for a while. And actually making masks and biking around, delivering them around the city was such a nice escape from like the negativity, to be able to share things with people, to be able to see my city. It was such a beautiful, even though it was a horrible time of year, it was also absurdly beautiful. Spring was in full bloom. And so biking up and down the Greenway to go to Tom's house, to deliver masks to people I knew, it was actually a really nice diversion. And so it worked out. Hopefully it worked out helping people, but also it helped me a lot. So I'm really grateful for that.
That was my same vibe about doing the podcast daily with past guests of the show. I'm like, I know it's helping them. It's helping the listeners. It's really helping me to talk to people. I played down the, Gil needs help too, but that's, we all had to find ways of, getting some mental health in order. Now, was the city as Omega Man like as people portrayed it in that early time, like April into May, where there was just no one? Like Perkins, Tom Tomorrow would talk about how like there was just no cars, no people. You step outside and think you're the only person left on Earth. Did you get that vibe when you were kind of traversing the city, or had things started to pick up by the time you were?
Maybe it was because I was specifically going out to see people. Yeah, I did this in a very socially distanced way. I should make it very clear, but like maybe it was because I had destinations and I had people I was going to see. It didn't feel too much like that. And my studio is in Chelsea. It's in the Flower District. It's on 29th Street. And it was deserted, but it was like, I don't know. It still felt like there were people around who had to be. And maybe I just wanted to see the glass as half full. Sure. The Greenway was packed. I mean, because people who live in Manhattan really wanted an outlet. They wanted exercise. The parks near us tended to be pretty lively. And yeah, I mean, it's undeniably true that whenever I biked through Times Square, it was really quiet. But again, as a biker, quiet is good. Quiet makes me happy. I'm used to fighting with traffic. I'm used to screaming at people. I'm used to having people scream at me. It can be really scary biking in New York City. So maybe I was just so happy to like arrive at my destination that I wasn't too focused on the like spookiness of it. But it is true. I mean, you can't deny that the city was very quiet. A lot of people left. I actually had to like kind of restrain myself, because if I saw someone like a postal worker, it was really tempting to just be like, thank you for being here. Thank you for doing what you're doing. It was crazy. And again, people will forget, what it was like, and that's fine. That's part of the healing process. But it was very spooky.
Yeah. I mean, Summer Pierre and I talked about how we both kind of wanted to drive into New York, not to go anywhere or see anyone, just to drive around the city with no one there. Just, it was that stretch in April when things seemed to be pretty dead, I guess. And we both had that impulse. Neither of us followed through on that as far as I know. But the other question I do want to ask, related to how the entire world that we're used to has fallen apart, which con or festival do you miss the most?
Oh my God. That's such...
Okay. Name your top three. I don't want you to put anyone else at Mocha, SPX and all this stuff.
It's so hard because I respect the work that goes into all of them so much. Without these conventions, I was at the first Mocha. Like I was it helped me become a cartoonist. And so Mocha is a huge one. I miss the Puck building still, always. There are still ridiculous pictures of me online wearing an Argentina national team soccer shirt and a Burger King hat, like a Burger King crown.
Nice.
With a pile of money. I mean, it's such a part of my personal history. I love it. Mocha's huge. But SPX, SPX being canceled really, and this is nothing against the organizers because I know they did it for the right reasons, but like when SPX was canceled, I was like, okay, I don't know what to do now because for me, that's a ritual. Yeah. It's a religious observance. It is so huge for me to go and spend time with the people I love, see people I don't get to see that much. I usually bunk with Glynis Fox, Summer Pierre, and like another person, TBD. And then we table, it's Summer, Glynis, and Jennifer Hayden and I table together. And without that kind of touching base moment, it's a really strange year. I'll miss the Ignatz Awards. It's just when you like go in and take the temperature of the comics community, see what's up, see what people are talking about, see what's hot. I always come away with like a million books I missed, but now desperately have to read. I was on a panel actually last year about sports comics, and I met such incredible people. I am now like such a lifelong fan of AJ Dungo, whose book In Waves is an absolute must read if you have not read it. It is the most beautiful memoir I've read in a really long time. So I'll miss SPX a lot. Can't lie. I'll miss, going to the Persian restaurant in the strip mall. I'll miss that feverish run back in time for the Ignatz Awards. I'll miss the early morning walks with Glynis and Summer. Yeah, it's gonna be weird. That weekend is gonna be super weird, and I'm gonna have to think of some way of kind of making it special, the way SPX usually makes it special. With Mocha, I kind of feel connected to it because one of the last things I did before the pandemic really hit was I was a judge for the student competitions at Society of Illustrators. And so I at least got to kind of touch base. I got to be in the building, absorb the magic. But with SPX, I feel like I have a lack. I have a real lack. And so I'm going to miss it.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, again, as a non-comics maker, having that, just a few of those things like TCAF, which is always big because it's the only event my wife will also come to because Toronto's got some fine restaurants.
It's so fabulous.
Get away
it's such
from
a great
comics
con.
people. But, just having a couple of those things as your annual event, I guess, like you said, sort of a ritual. It's going to be tough, I admit. But
I've only been to TCAF once, and it was just...
Yeah?
Sorry?
Oh, no, tell me what your TCAF.
I was just going to say, I've only been to TCAF once. There are a bunch of cons I've only been to once. TCAF is one of them. It was phenomenal. It's just like, it's such a great convention.
Yeah.
One of my all-time favorite comics artists, Mayoko Ano, happened to be there that year. She did a series of manga called Happy Mania and also Sakuran. And in the closing Fat got nominated for the Angoulême Prize one year. And just the idea of like a convention that unites cartoonists with like these world-class talents is just, they do a really good job. Hats off to them. I'm not surprised your wife would, get on a plane for that, because it's an amazing convention.
Yeah, that's one that the convention itself is good, but Toronto on top of that makes it, palatable. Whereas an SPX, you're in the hotel and in the convention area, and there's nothing to like just go out and do the way we can go for a walk in Toronto, and also found some really phenomenal restaurants over the years. But,
okay, then I need some tips, because I liked Toronto, but it was a little challenging to figure out like what to do.
Yeah.
We did have phenomenal South Indian food.
No, we'll set you up. When we're all able to travel there again, when they finally take down their border wall to keep the ugly Americans out, I will set you up with some amazing places to go.
Okay, all right. It's a deal.
Yeah. Oh, we had these rituals. Like Tom Spurgeon, we would take to this great Chinese restaurant the Sunday of TCAF weekend. We would always go with him and
oh, how lovely.
And that was that's been the ongoing thing about this, that the weird irony is that without Tom, there will be no more festivals ever again. That, just happens to coincide with losing Tom. We also, no one has a show anymore because of the pandemic. We're like,
it's very cosmically intriguing.
It's weirdly fitting. Yeah. But my last question, first time you met a serious idol of yours in comics? Do you remember meeting someone that you just, holy shit, this is the person whose work I idolized when I was younger? And then, of course, do you remember melting down around them?
Oh my God, that is such a good question. Okay, first of all, I am very shy in person, extremely shy. And so we'll notice this because I've met all three of your table mates, Summer, Jen, and Glynis. I have great relationships with, and they always introduce me to you, and we've never connected until a few months ago. So I will say, yes, you are shy, but I'm a shy person. I mean, it's comics introversion. It's, in the, it's basically in the dictionary. If you are a cartoonist, unless you're an outlier, you're kind of introverted. This is going to sound so pretentious.
We all need being happy.
The first person I met whose comics I was obsessed with was when I was in France as a college student, and I was living in Paris for the summer, working on my comic. Thank you, Smith College. And I heard through a friend about an event somewhere in the suburbs where David Bay was going to be, and his work was going to be exhibited. And this is before the iPhone, this is before Google Maps. I had no idea how to get there. My little Parisian map guide was just, not going to be of any use. Somehow I figured out how to get there. I remember a succession of buses and a lot of asking questions of people about where different buses went. And so I met David Bay. And it was the first time I'd ever met a real idol like that in person. And I remember us having a fairly low-key conversation, although he was very confused. And this is going to sound like a complete humble brag, so I own it. I'm sorry. He was very confused to meet an American who spoke decent French. He could not pass us that.
Was your French good enough to talk to? Because I think I've heard him speak once, and his English isn't passable.
Well, at this point, I'd been studying French for 8 years, and I'd lived in France for almost a full year. So my French was, at that time, pretty good. But he just couldn't comprehend that there were Americans who speak French. And so our conversation was very strange. But I adore his work because completely, absolutely
I've got
adore
a
it.
shelf of his stuff sitting right next to me where we're recording. I've got a whole bunch of his books sitting right here beside me. So.
Oh yeah, he's a legend. I mean, out of the original founders of L'Association, he's probably the one I connect with the most. And I've subsequently heard him speak many times. And so I think that would be the first time I met somebody who I was just like, I can't even, this is crazy. And since then, I've been lucky enough to meet a lot of cartoonists I really respect. Although, like I said, I do tend to be very shy. And Summer and Glynis are way better at approaching people and just being friendly and normal, which is a quality I completely admire and am jealous of.
Yeah. Well, again, they've got the performing arts backgrounds also, as does Jen Hayden. The stage presence sort of thing, which I guess maybe translates into social situations.
I guess so. I was stage crew all the way. So.
Yeah. Now, last real question. Over under for Mets wins in this 60-game season?
Oh my God. Oh, don't make me say it. Okay, first of all, I'm still not sure I'm even going to watch because I really am very conflicted about the way MLB is restarting. I did, however, participate in the charity, the opportunity to buy a Mets cutout for charity. I don't think they're going
the figures
to
that'll be sitting in the crowd, you mean?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. I don't think they're going to accept my cutout because my cutout, I'm carrying a cat. They might not like that. And also my husband, the guidelines were a little unclear. And my husband has a sign that says Black Lives Matter. And I could see that being the sort of thing that is not going to be popular. So I don't know if we're actually going to see our cutouts. This is a long way of saying I might sneakily watch some games just to see if I see us in the stands. But I want to say over. The end of last season was so phenomenal. We were lucky enough. We live pretty far from Citi Field, but we headed out to Queens for a couple of games because Pete Alonso, the rookie of the year, the guy who won the home run derby last year, he beat Aaron Judge's home run record. He went on Twitter and he was like, Mets fans, you got to show up because this is going to be dope as hell. You have got to be there. And we went and the games were electric. They were so fabulous. And the Mets just missed being in a wild card spot. They did end with a winning record, if I remember correctly. They did then have a lot of craziness because they chose a new manager. Then it turned out that the new manager was tied up in the Houston Astros cheating scandal. It's such a Mets situation. You pick someone who seems totally normal, and then turns out they have this dark past. And so they have a new manager, Luis Rojas. We'll see. It's all very TBD. But within the very short bit of the game I watched last night, Pete Alonso pulled off an amazing play. There was a wild throw to first. He grabbed it. He was able to get someone out of third. I feel like that might be a sign. Unlike the 6 errors that the Mets registered last night, I'm just going to focus on the positive.
They have another game tonight at 7. It's on the MLB network, so I don't know if you get that or not. But
I do.
There's another Yankee. Yes, Yankee. I figured, but I didn't want to assume that cartoonists spend any money on anything besides.
Well, okay, this is going to really out me as like bougie as hell. But our building makes us have cable because it's a group package. Mm-hmm. And so it's actually cheaper than it normally would be. And that's my excuse. And that's what I'm going with.
Nice. Again, we'll figure 33 and 27.
Ooh, that actually is very Mets. I think that's a good guess. They're usually at like 495 or like 510.
Yeah, so you're figuring that's like an 86, 87 win season under normal circumstances?
Yeah, I feel like that's actually pretty generous. It just depends. I mean, if Yoenis Cespedes, if the Wild Boars have left him able to hit, for those who are not familiar with the Wild Boar incident, basically he has a ranch in Florida, the Mets outfielder, Yoenis Cespedes. He fell in a hole and was attacked by a wild boar. It's insane. It can only happen to the Mets. If he's hitting, then it could be more than that. Let's say if I'm going to be optimistic, I'm going to say 36-24 because I'm counting on Cespedes having something to prove.
Sounds good. I'll hold you to it, and we'll follow up at the end of the season, which, again, as we said, might come faster than anybody's predicting.
It could be Friday.
Yeah, we will find out if half the league goes down with COVID after the first set of flights. But
I mean, I
we'll
hope
keep our
not,
fingers
for their
crossed.
sake.
I know. I'm hoping, not that it's normal, but at least that there's something that they can do that's going to be functional. So we'll see. But Ellen, thanks so much for coming on, and I hope we get to talk in person sometime. I hope we get to go to restaurants in Toronto and see each other at SPX.
Oh, what a fabulous thing to potentially happen at some point in the future. I really hope so. And thank you so much for interviewing me. It's a great privilege.
And that was Ellen Lindner. Go to littlewhitebird.com so you can check out her work. And that's all one word, spelled normally, littlewhitebird.com. You can find pages about her comics, illustration, teaching, and more, as well as a link to her Etsy shop where you can buy her work. And I seriously recommend both issues of Cranklets Chronicle. They're great. The comics page on her site also has a link to some of her, well, a whole bunch of her work, but particularly some of her autobiographical strips from Spiral Bound. And those are really, really good. She's a cartoonist who, I don't want to say flies under the radar. She flew under my radar, which is faulty, as we all know. So I'm awfully glad I got to explore more of her stuff and get to sit down for this conversation with her. Oh, and as she mentioned, Ellen's got a new piece out in the Pandemics comics anthology, edited by past guests of the show, Dean Haspiel and Whitney Matheson. You can find out more about that anthology at patreon.com/pandemics, which ends with an X. So it's PANDEMIX. I'll have a link to that too. And Ellen's also on Twitter and Instagram as Ellen Lindner, which is ELLENLINDNA. There'll be links to that too. Now, this is the time where in the past I would talk about my Patreon, PayPal, etc. But I don't want your financial support right now. I would appreciate letters, postcards, emails. You can find my information through my website. What I want you to do, if you do have money to spare in any way, support food banks, bail funds, freedom funds, legal aid funds for people who are in trouble right now because of their exercising their right to protest and assemble. There's a lot going on in this country right now. It's a lot of people and institutions that could use your help. There are also individuals, if you want to give through Patreons, GoFundMes, Kickstarters, Indiegogos. All I'm saying is, if you're in a position to help people, help them, because we're all in this together. Now, I will say, as part of the Patreon type thing, I have a zine called Haiku for Business Travelers. It's free. If you want to support me in any way with it, in terms of postage and production, you can send me some money through PayPal. You can find the information for all this at haikuforbusinesstravelers.com, or just send me an email and say you're interested and want to get a copy of it. Send me your mailing address and I'll send it out. It is print only. It's 32 pages. It is writing, photography, and podcast excerpts. It's me sharing my art, such as it is. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. Now, you've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.